All right. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces and so many new faces as well. If you'd like to drop a line in the chat box and tell us where you're joining from, that would be great. I'm just going to tell you a few welcoming words, tell you a bit about our school, our training center, and what other things we have planned for you guys in the near future. And then I'm going to give the floor to Sandy, who's going to be leading today's webinar. All right. So as many of you already know, International House Bucharest is part of a very large network of schools based everywhere in the world, as the map on your screens shows. As such, we are accredited and endorsed both by International House World Organization and by Equals, which is an association that ensures quality language services in centers all around Europe. In Romania, International House has 4 divisions. Our first line of business, so to speak, had to deal with language courses for adults, general and business English mostly, but also modern languages and Romanian for expats. We then developed into our quite large young learner division, where we teach from the very youngest, from kindergartners all the way to teenagers. We've recently expanded into teaching German. We used to teach German to adults, but now we've also got German classes for younger learners and for teenagers in Deutsche Akademie Bucharest. And finally, last but not least, we've got our teacher training center, which apart from hosting this series of webinars, also deals with teacher training courses such as SALTA, Delta, IHC and the VYL course. I'm just going to tell you a few words about our upcoming courses before I hand you over to Sandy. We still have a few places left on our SALTA courses this year. All 3 of them will take place fully online, and we've got about 1 place left in June and a couple in August. The part-time course starting in September is currently accepting plenty of applicants. So if you're interested in any of these, you can see offers and early bird discounts on our website. We also still have 2 seats available on our full-time Module 2 Delta course this summer, and we've also launched our part-time Module 2 course starting in October. Both of these will be run fully online, so no matter where you're joining from, you can take part in our Delta courses. All you have to do is go to our website and see our offers and apply. Our IACYLT course is also run fully online this summer. Starting on the 5th of July, 3 weeks of intensive classes. So if you're interested in learning how to teach or improving your teaching approach to young learners and teenagers, this is the course for you. And finally, today's session marks the end of the season, as I like to call it, for Coffee at IH. We've had a great run this spring with plenty of great names, and today Sandy is ready to send us off into the summer, but we will be returning in October, so keep an eye on our page and be sure to join us again in autumn. Finally, I just wanted to let you know that you will be receiving certificates of attendance for this session, and they'll be coming to your inbox within 2 weeks of today's webinar. So that being said, I am ready to take my leave. So Sandy, if you're ready, you can start sharing.
Okay, so morning everybody, afternoon, I don't know where you are. I think a lot of you it's still morning, so let's see. Okay. Oh, hang on. Sorry, that didn't do what I wanted it to do. Just a second, I've forgotten how to use Zoom. Just bear with me 1 second. Right, where are we? This one. I blame Polish. I get confused about what's which one is which window. And I need this one, right? I'm there. Can I ask one or two people to keep their cameras on, because it's a little bit easier if I've got some faces to talk to, if that's okay as well. And then I will now start professionally now that I'm actually ready. So good morning, everybody. My name is Sandy Millen. I'm the Director of Studies at International House Bydgoszcz, which is in Poland. And I'm just entering my last couple of weeks here. So I've been here for 6 years. And this is the second talk that I've done for IH Bucharest. I did one a year ago as well, which I think you can still watch the recording of. What you can see on the screen at the moment is how you can contact me if you have any questions or you want to give any feedback on the presentation. And you can also see the link where you'll find all of the slides and the recordings and everything to access after the talk. Yeah, so I'm talking about classroom and real world listening. And just to start off with, I'm going to put everybody into a breakout room, I hope. And you'll have just a couple of minutes to introduce yourself to the other people in the rooms. Let's see, I've got a lot of people. So the key thing here is that there's going to be quite big groups and you've only got 1 minute to do this. So you've all got to introduce yourselves as quickly as possible. Okay, that may involve talking over each other. Are you ready? I'm going to give you 2 minutes to get into the room and back out again. As soon as you're done, come back to the main room. Okay, so introduce yourself, say where you're from, and then come back to the main room once you've heard from everybody. Okay, there's a reason it's quick. Here you go. Excellent, room 4, you're the first ones who are back. Everybody else has 30 seconds, but you guys obviously followed the instructions of doing it very quickly, so well done. Let's see, room 1 is coming back as well. Everybody else has got 15 seconds. Room 5 is coming back. Room 9 is coming back. We've got 14 rooms. 5 seconds left. Okay, so everybody's got 15 seconds to come back at this point. So let's see how quickly they can manage it. Okay, everybody should be back around about now. Okay, so imagine that we've just done that in a kind of a big conference room. You talking across each other. It doesn't work quite the same way on Zoom because you have to take turns. You can't necessarily hear everything. But in the chat, could you write what kind of problems you had when you were introducing yourselves to each other? what might have made it challenging for you? Yeah, technical problems don't help. Oh, lots of people had no problems. Laura, that wasn't a problem that I anticipated, going up the stairs. Okay, Patricia. Yeah, Chuck, that's true. You can't tell if people are listening when you don't have that visual signal as well. There's, you know, additional problems that you have with technology. Any other issues that anybody had? No? So again, that's also true, Chuck, sometimes, yeah, that the cameras turn off automatically when you switch programs. Yeah, so obviously we had some kind of technologically mediated problems, apart from Laura going up the stairs. But if you're doing this in, you know, if we were all in the same room at the same time, you may also have had problems with the noise levels, maybe different voices that you're not used to, like an older voice, a younger voice, accents as well. So there can be lots of problems with listening that we don't necessarily deal with in the language classroom. Yeah, or like Lena just said, background noise, so people might not be able to hear you. So yeah, so these are all things we don't necessarily talk about in the classroom, but they cause learners problems when they're listening. So the reason that I originally did this talk is because of this sentence that my students in IH Newcastle used to say to me. And they'd say, I've been studying English for years, but I can't understand anyone. And I think that's quite a depressing problem. You know, you've been working really hard on this language, and then you arrive in the UK. And yes, okay, Newcastle accents are challenging. I had trouble with them sometimes as well. But still, you've been in a classroom, surely you should be able to understand these people. And they had problems not just with native speakers, but with other non-natives in the class. So for example, we had people who were native Spanish and Japanese and Korean and Arabic speakers, but they couldn't understand each other either. They could often only understand people from the same language background as them. So that's what we're going to look at today is how to help those learners. So a couple of questions for you. Again, if you can write in the chat. Think about when we do listening in the classroom, okay? The first question in the chat, what do students listen to in the classroom? Or what kind of listening input do they potentially get? Yeah, instructions, monologues, interviews, other students, if they speak English. Yeah, maybe conversation, maybe graded tasks, which is really important. We often grade the language that's in there. A lot of conversations, maybe some other natural audio, some authentic things, but as George says, it's mostly non-authentic. We might have songs, correction, where they're dealing with the stuff of language as well as the actual listening. Maybe if you're, you know, some teachers might give them videos, cartoons, as Stefania says. Yeah, maybe grammar through music. So often the listening we're doing actually feeds language. It's not focusing on the listening itself. Yeah, as Alina says, maybe TED Talks. But those things are not necessarily so common. I would say probably the two most common things they listen to are, as Marina says, are the teacher speaking to them, giving instructions, again, if the teacher's doing that in English, and then the students speaking to each other. And generally, if they have a course book, recordings from the course book, which are generally quite long and not interactive, they're just listening to what might be termed background noise in some ways, maybe 2 or more minutes continuously of listening. And at advanced level, some course books, it can be as long as 5 minutes of just listening, of just sound coming at them with no interaction, as you might get in a lot of real life situations. So then the next question is, what type of tasks do they do and why are they doing those tasks? So this is what they listen to. What tasks do we give the students to do with this listening? Okay, so we try to get them to understand the gist or the main idea, but what's the actual task that we're asking them to do? Yeah, so Maruna's mentioned comprehension tasks, gap fills. You know, what are they doing while they're listening or after they're listening? Yeah. Identifying the kind of recording, multiple choice tests, multiple matching, especially if it's more exam focused. True or false. So yeah, identifying opinions from it. And now Alina's mentioned some things where you're dealing with the actual sounds or the words, maybe phonetics, maybe putting things in order. Okay, checking predictions. Yeah, so a lot of the tasks that we do in the classroom are based on comprehension questions of some kind, where we want them, you know, we set questions for them, which we expect them to answer. So that these are your true or false or multiple choice, whatever it is. Often we're using the listening to introduce new language. So here's the listening, here's some vocab from it, or here's the listening, here's some grammar from it, let's study that. And a lot of the time we're testing students with the listening. We're not actually teaching them. And why are they doing it? They're doing it because they need to do something with the listening. We don't always have a clear idea of why we've given them that particular task, because we want to test their understanding of it. But why that task and not another one, for example, or because they're preparing for an exam. So let's compare that then. To listening in real life. So same questions. What do you listen to first? Oops, I'm sorry, I got over enthusiastic there. So first question in the chat, what do you listen to in real life? I've listened to WhatsApp messages from my friend this morning, for example, the news, other people. Yeah, interviews, radio shows, podcasts, your students. Yeah, exactly. Small talk, directions, music. Yeah, lots of different people with different accents. Yeah, as Ingrid says, you're listening for the information you need. What's the weather today, for example? Films, movies, people talking over each other, your neighbours chatting, gossip, eavesdropping in a restaurant, you know, all kinds of different things. As Chuck says, yeah, people repeating themselves. Like Ruby's, yeah, my answer, my husband sometimes. You don't always listen to the other people who are talking to you, which again is a really important point. So what you'll notice from that is that's quite different to the answers that you gave before. But in theory, what we're doing in the classroom is preparing our learners for real life. And yet those two things, those two sets of things that you listen to are quite different. So then the next question, what type of tasks do you do in real life with this listening? Yes, Chuck, yeah, learning to ignore people. I found it after I'd lived in a Russian-speaking country for a year. And when I came back to the UK, I found it really hard to tune people out. Yeah, engaging in conversations, reporting back on something. Yeah, just getting the information that you need. Understanding something in a conversation and responding to it, or as Gabriella says, thinking about what to reply and what to say next. And as Alina says, a lot of the listening we do is just for pleasure. You know, you're watching a film and you're just doing that for pleasure. Yes, okay, you want to understand the story, but nobody's asked you to put pictures in order or answer questions about it, for example. Yeah, as Alexandra says, using the information. So, you know, you're chatting to your partner and they say, can you buy some milk? You need to understand that they've asked that so that you put milk on your shopping list and you go and buy it, for example. So again, you'll notice that these tasks are quite different to what we're asking the learners to do in real life. Yeah, so that's just to get you thinking at the beginning. So now I'm going to play you two audios. And I'd just like you to listen to the two conversations and make some notes about what differences you notice between the conversations. Okay. Hopefully I've got my audio sharing, but Teo, if you can't hear it, please can you let me know? Okay, so here is the first audio.
4.6.
Charlotte, I can see from your face that the results weren't exactly what you wanted, am I right?
Yeah.
4.6.
Oh,
I can see from your face that the results weren't...
4.6.
sorry, I
Face
keep
that the
clicking
results
things.
weren't exactly what you wanted, am I right?
Yeah. I got an A in chemistry and biology, but only a B in physics and a C in maths.
So, what are you going to do now?
Well, first I'll get in touch with the university. Perhaps they'll still accept me, but I don't think they will, so I'll probably take my A-levels again next year.
Were your parents angry?
No, my mum and dad have been really nice. They know how disappointed I am.
Well, Victor, did you pass your FCE exam?
Yes, I passed, and I got a B. I am very pleased. I didn't think I'd get a B. I thought I'd get a C.
And your friends?
They all passed, except one, but he didn't expect to pass. He didn't do any work.
So, are you going out to celebrate?
Oh yes, we're going to have champagne in a bar and we are going to have dinner together.
Okay, so those were the first conversations from English File Intermediate. Okay, now listen to the second conversation and compare it. And I apologise for the juddering at the beginning. I tried to type in the chat box and it wasn't happy about that. Okay, so here is the second set. Laura, if you can't hear the audio, you should be able to go to anybody who can't hear the audio. Let me just put a link into the chat. Sorry, I've forgotten how to type. Okay, if you go here, you should be able to hear the audio there as well. The audio clips are in there. Okay, here's the second clip.
4.6.
Oh,
When I was young,
That's why we put it in the. When you were young,
when I
my
was young,
goodness,
very
we're
long time
going
ago,
back.
I went to the cinema with somebody. I took them to see a film.
This is very vague.
Yes, there's no need to be specific. I went to the cinema with somebody. I took them to see a film, and afterwards they were horribly offended, and I had no idea why. And I had to say, so you know, after they wouldn't speak to me the next day, what did I do wrong? She said, well, you know, you took somebody to the cinema and you didn't kiss her. I said, it was a film on. I didn't realise that was what. That was the end of that. That was literally the beginning and end of that.
The fact that you sat there, you didn't
Watch
eat
the film.
anything.
No,
you
I
didn't
just
put your feet up.
No, the film was on.
You clearly didn't get the message.
No, I didn't.
okay, so I think most people could hear those two audios. So now in the chat, could you write what differences you noticed between the conversations? Okay, Alina. So let's talk about the style of the style of the speaking. Yeah, so Chuck, they overlapped a lot with each other. Real conversation versus something scripted, graded and ungraded. The second one on actors, that's actually from a real podcast. Yeah, so no turn taking. Marianne, you mentioned speed and accent, but what did you notice about that, about the speed and the accent? Yeah, Chuck says they can talk and listen at the same time. And Patricia says the second one is more authentic. There are interruptions, there's hesitation. The first one is very rehearsed and it does sound quite unnatural. The second one has different kinds of, the first one has clear pauses, everything's clearly articulated. There are no false starts. Everything is a question followed by an answer. And in the second one, as Chuck says, they're not really sure what they're going to say until they actually say it. So they change what they're saying all the time. The second one also, the speed of what they say changes all the time. So some things they say quite slowly in a quite measured way, and then occasionally there'll be a long pause, and then they'll say something very, very quickly. Another thing you might notice in the first one, in the very first conversation you heard, is that it was a male speaking to a female. The voices are very distinct. And then the second conversation with Victor about his FCE, it was a male with a British accent speaking to a male with a non-British accent, with very clear accents. So it's much easier to hear who's speaking at any given time. Mark Kermode and Simon Mayo, they're both a similar age, they're from a similar part of the UK, and sometimes you don't know, if you're not familiar with their voices, you don't know which of the two is speaking at any given time. So not only are they not taking turns in the same way as the English file one, but even when they are turn taking, as an inexperienced listener, you won't necessarily know whose turn it is at that point in the conversation. So I'm not suggesting that we should ditch coursebook audio entirely, or even at all. I think coursebook audio has lots of useful features to it, but we need to help students to be able to deal with the second kind of listening as well. And we can actually use what's in the coursebook to help learners build up the skills that they need to deal with that more natural, overlapping, non-turn taking, spontaneous speech that they might hear, and also the different accents, all that kind of thing. So yeah, so that's the end of the thinking part. Here's the input part, I think.
When I was
Okay, so the first thing that you can do, you're in class, you've done the comprehension activity, and now you know that some of the learners have got things wrong, and rather than just moving on and going, yes, that wasn't B, that was C, you can find out what actually went wrong. Okay, so follow up on wrong answers. Potential problems that learners might have had might include the speed of the speech. Maybe they're not used to connected speech or weak forms. Or maybe if you're listening to authentic speech, maybe the speed varies and they can manage the slow speech, but not the fast speech. Another problem they might have is with the voice type. So maybe it's an accent they're unfamiliar with. Maybe they've only ever listened to people between the ages of about 20 and 50, which is what very often happens in course books. They only hear children if they're in a children's class and they have a young learner course book. They only hear teenagers if they have a teenage course book. And you very rarely hear anybody with an elderly voice in a course book. So maybe learners aren't used to those different kinds of voices. Or maybe they have trouble with male or female accents. I know that when I'm learning foreign languages, I find it much harder to understand males than I do females. I don't know why, there are possible reasons, but I tend to be able to hear what females are saying much more clearly than males. Another problem, and this is one that came up earlier with the hello activity, is the sound quality. Maybe there's background noise, maybe the volume isn't good, maybe there's an echo. And again, learners need to be able to hear, you know, for example, you're in a noisy train station and you need to be able to pick out the platform that you're traveling from. Or you're on holiday, you're in a hotel bar, and you need to be able to hear what the barman has said to you when you're trying to order a drink, for example. And then possibly the thing which we most often think of when there's a problem is potentially a lack of language. Maybe they don't know the grammar points, or they don't know some of the key vocabulary. I'm not going to talk about that so much in this talk. A big problem might also be a lack of confidence. It may be that they know that they've had problems with listening before, and so they think they will continue to have those problems. And then another problem may just be that they misheard it, that they confidently thought that they heard something else, and they've misinterpreted what they've heard. So confidence comes with practice, but it also comes with support, it comes with encouragement, and it comes with being helped to understand why you had problems and knowing and reflecting on what you can do about those problems in the future. Language comes with more classes, more study time, more exposure. So we're going to focus a little bit more on the first three of those areas. So I think some people already mentioned that weak forms is something to work on. This is one part of pronunciation for listening. It's quite difficult to divide pronunciation and listening at this level, at the level of weak forms. But it's something that it's worth doing to help your learners. So in the chat, what do you think is the most common sound in English? Hopefully most of you know the answer to this question. Yeah, exactly. So this is the schwa, which is the upside down E in the phonemic speech. So when I teach the schwa, the important thing about schwa is it's basically the absolute minimal effort sound, but it's not spelt in any particular way. It's the spelling of it doesn't, learners can't know that it's a schwa just from the spelling. But they need to be able to hear schwas and potentially produce some of them, but that's not so important. This is more about listening. So it's when your mouth isn't doing anything, it's really lazy. So the way that I do it is I say, imagine that you're a teenager and your parents have just said, clean your room, or told you for the 20th time that you can't go out with your friends when you want to, and you go, and you make the absolute minimal sound that you can. You don't want to make any more effort than you want to. I tend, if I'm in a face-to-face classroom, even online, I get everybody to stand up and just go, you're alert, you're ready to go, and then you go, okay? And this is quite entertaining, but it also helps the learners to hear it. And when I put it into a word, I show them just how little my mouth is moving. So I take, for example, the word can, and I say, okay, look at my mouth. Can you see how little it's moving? Can. Or I take had, and I say, so that they can see that it's the minimal effort sound. And I like this cartoon. You've probably seen this before. There are lots of variants on it, but I think the llama one is the best one. So something else that you can do with weak forms then is you can show the learners what some of the most common words are that have weak forms. There's a link to this from the blog post which I've shared. I'll give you the link again at the end of the talk. You can show the learners these words and ask them to play with the words. So again, as I just showed you, like saying the words as small as possible. And highlighting that the weak forms are actually the norm and strong forms are for the end of clauses or for emphasis. So most of the time when they hear them, the learners will hear these as weak forms. So one of the things I get the learners to do, for example, is to try and make a sentence using one or two or maybe even three of these words, and then say them as quickly as possible. And they can pass those sentences on to other people to do that. And that activity works quite nicely to show the learners that, it doesn't have to come from a real listening text. That is listening practice, but without having a whole audio around it. That's something you can do, for example, if you're introducing a new bit of grammar, you're teaching, for example, past perfect or present perfect, or you're teaching modal verbs, or you're teaching countable, uncountable. If you put this activity in there, you get the learners to say it as quickly as possible, you're training their listening skills. Another activity is with connected speech. And this can be a big problem because it changes the sounds of words. So this activity that I'll show you is from Hancock MacDonald. So Mark Hancock particularly is very active in teaching pronunciation. A lot of you might be familiar with his pronunciation games book, or with his pronunciation chart that looks like this with the hexagons in it. He and Annie MacDonald have a lot of very interesting activities on their blog, and a lot of them particularly deal with pronunciation and with listening. So this activity is called the word blender. So we take this, for example, apples and pears, and the learners have to say, what is it? So apples and pears. And then they have to identify the changes that happen in this, in this little stretch of speech. So, and they can use whatever language they want to describe these changes. So one of the things that they might notice is that the D sound at the end of and is gone. They might notice that the S sound or the Z sound from apples has moved. So it's effectively on the and rather than the apples. And they might notice that the N sound has changed to M. So 3 changes. You can use that language, or you can say there is elision of D, liaison of S, and assimilation of N to M. But you don't need this technical language for them. So what slide am I on? I don't think we've got time to do this activity in breakout rooms, but you can have a look in the chat. So choose any one of those phrases, and in the chat, write what's the original phrase and what changes do you notice? What's happened within connected speech? Okay, so it's good that you're identifying the original forms, but what's happened? What are the changes? Don't just identify the forms, identify the form and say what's happened. So what's missing, what's changed, what's moved? Okay, Michelle. Can you be more specific? What letters have moved? Where? Yeah, Alex, the T disappears in fruitcake. Extra sounds have been added in. Yeah, try and be specific about which particular, so this is what you want to do with the learners. Don't get them to talk in generalizations, get them to talk in specifics and then generalize from those specifics. Yeah, so you'll notice that common things that happen in connected speech, t's and does disappear, or they move to the beginning of a vowel in the next word. A n very often changes to a m. So this is what you want to do. Do the activity and get the learners to be as specific as possible, exactly what sounds have changed, exactly what sounds have moved. And then they can start to notice, oh, that sound always changes in those situations. Oh, that sound always moves in that situation. Yeah, so you can use an activity like this to come up with specifics and then generalizations that can then be applied to other specific situations later on. So you teach them, you do some listening a few days later, and one of the learners says to you, "What's zum, teacher? What means zum?" And then you go, "Do you remember apples and pears?" And they think, "Oh yes, that was and." Okay, so that's again, that's a way of training them. Okay, so then another thing you can do with connected speech then is to teach. So that's one where the learners come up with the rules. Another thing that you can do is to teach them some simple rules. So for example, I was working with a group of pre-intermediate students. I taught them that a final consonant followed by an initial vowel, that there's a link. And I showed them on a sentence that we had just heard in a pre-intermediate English file story. Okay, some of you might be familiar with this. And we also looked at other changes that happen. So you'll notice that there are crosses for the t's. I've underlined in green the things that were emphasized. These are the important words, and I got them to notice that mostly these words don't change. And we've put the schwas in there for was, and we mentioned that because, if you say it very quickly, might become cause. When it's followed by she, that's linked together to become cause she. And I showed the students how quickly I could say this. And at the beginning, they all said, "I can't do that, no way." And we did some drilling and some practice. And by the end, they could say, "It was a woman in a white car. She was going very fast because she was in a hurry." My pre-intermediates could say it at that speed. And that really improved their confidence. So this is something that Richard Cauldwell talks about. I'll show you his name later on. He talks about 3 kinds of listening or pronunciation. He talks about greenhouse pronunciation, where everything is protected, everything is separate. For example, it was a woman in a white car. Everything is in its little pot and it doesn't touch anything else. After the greenhouse, you have the garden. And this is where we operate most in the language classroom, where there are some nice, clear rules, like these connected speech rules, that we can show the students. Things are controlled and managed like a garden, but some things overlap, some things kind of bleed into each other. So this is where you have, it was a woman in a white car. It was a woman in a white car, was a woman in a. So it's still garden, it's still recognizable. And then the challenge, the area that the students have the most trouble, where Kermode and Mayo were operating, this is the jungle. And this is the most challenging area because there are no rules. Anything can grow anywhere and it can be hard to fight your way through. It was a woman in a white car. It was a woman in a white car. It was a woman in a white car. All kinds of different pronunciation, different emphasis. And so Cauldwell talks about taking your learners on a botanic walk. You start in the greenhouse, then you move to the garden, and then you move to the jungle, and you encourage them to experiment with different ways of pronouncing things. And if you do this just with a single sentence every few lessons, this will improve your learners' confidence with decoding what Cauldwell calls the stream of speech. Okay, definitely a metaphor that I think it's worth exploring and finding out more about. I'll give you a link for where you can find that out later on. So we used this connected speech, and I taught the learners this, I drilled it, and it really improved their confidence. Another area which is perhaps often neglected or underused is transcripts. So I was working with the same pre-intermediate group. We had this listening from New English File pre-intermediate, and they really struggled, not least because Sean, who was speaking, had a very strong Irish accent, which they probably never heard before. We did the listening and they only got, in the correct the wrong information, they probably only got 2 or 3 answers right. So we went to the transcript and we had a look at just one section We had a look at just one question and answer. And I taught them a couple of rules of connected speech. We built on what we'd done with the woman in a white car. And they had to mark it up on the transcript. Okay, so obviously they've seen it, they know what's there. But the challenge here is connecting the visual signal to the sound signal that they hear and making those connections like it is now, or you see, where they might be expecting you see. And then they listened again, and this is what they heard, and they found it much easier the second time round. So here's the audio.
So why did they choose Ibiza? It's the party island.
Yes, it is now, but they didn't know that. You see, they first went to Ibiza in the late 60s, when it was a beautiful, peaceful island with traditional cafes and restaurants, deserted beaches. And this was exactly what they wanted. So they looked on the internet. My uncle loves his computer. And they booked a hotel for a week in the same part of the island where they'd been before. And they found some cheap flights. It all seemed so perfect.
So you can hear why that might have been challenging for my pre-intermediate Russian-speaking students. But once we'd done that with one paragraph, when they went back and listened to the rest of the text, they were able to answer the questions in 5B much more easily because they'd had a bit more time to get used to the accent and to think about these features of connected speech. So do make use of the transcripts. Okay, so the next activity I'm going to talk about is from John Field. Again, I'll mention his name. I'll show you where you can find out more about him later on. So in the chat, you're going to hear a sentence, and I'd like you to write it in the chat. Now, I noticed that there's about 20 people who are participating in the chat. I know you might have other things to do, but what would be really interesting is if as many of you as possible could write these two sentences so we can hear what kind of forms you come out with. Okay, so listen to sentence 1.
Today we're looking at a lot of listening activities.
I'll play it one more time.
Today we're looking at a lot of listening activities.
Yeah, excellent. So for you guys, that's pretty easy. And you'll notice that everybody's got pretty much the same thing. But now imagine that you're elementary students and things like we're looking at a lot of that, they may not be able to break up those words. Thank you everybody for taking part in that one. So that was me, that was a recording from me. So now here's one from a course book.
I'm here for a conference.
Yeah, thanks Chuck. Chuck's put in one of the potential problems they might have, furry instead of for. Yeah, so you guys, again, you're all experienced experienced listeners, so you can pick out that, and you're experienced English speakers, so you can pick out that that is for a. But some students might not be able to do that. They might not be able to break down those words. So doing micro dictation is a really fantastic way of finding out what did the learners actually hear. And again, this is something that you can do after the students have made a mistake with the listening, or it's something you can do to introduce a new grammatical feature where there are small sounds that they might not hear. For example, the difference between I want to go and I won't go. You can do that as micro dictations, for example. So if you want to create a micro dictation, if you're speaking yourself, it's very easy to record it on your phone. You can also use a tool like Audacity if you're on a PC or a Mac. You can use WavePad on an iPad, or online, if you've got an audio, like I had the English file one, you can clip it using MP3 cuts or using YouTube Trimmer. These are just simple tools you can use to clip out the sound that you want, unless you're very good at saying things yourself and you can use exactly the same intonation every time. Today, we're looking at a lot of listening activities. How good are you at being a stuck record? This activity also makes great homework for your learners. And if you can give them like a series of sentences that perhaps lead into the topic for next week, or different things that you know they have trouble hearing. Okay, so I've given you a few activities. And so the next area to talk about, somebody has mentioned this already in the chat, is the idea that when you're trying to comprehend listening, you're using two sets of processes to help you understand. So one of those sets of processes is bottom-up processing. So this is the knowledge of sounds, words, grammar, vocabulary. This is where you're building from small pieces, and it's like you're looking at it with a magnifying glass. Do I understand this? Do I understand this? Do I understand this? And you're putting it all together. The other set of processes that you might use, or that you do use, is top-down listening. And this is where you're taking, for example, your knowledge of the context, your knowledge of the person speaking. So, for example, I've been listening to Kermode and Mayo for 13 years. So I always know who's speaking, and I'm very used to particular things that they might say, particular quirks of their English. Other things might be past experiences of the same situation. So how often have you been into a shop to order a coffee, for example, and you're very familiar with what that dialogue might be. So even if it's very noisy and you can't hear exactly what the person said, you can make an educated guess of what's actually just happened. So all of these top-down processes, you're extrapolating from the wider context, and it's like you're an eagle flying over the situation. And you put these two processes together. So far, we've looked at lots of different bottom-up activities because top-down is the normal focus in class. You're generally dealing with prediction or gist. So I'm going to finish with a couple of top-down processing skills, which you can help learners to improve. Okay, so here is one. So in the chat, I'd like you to write, what do you think the next words are in this little bit of conversation? This is the beginning. So when I was, what's next? Now you'll notice, if you have a look in the chat, when I was fab, when I was a kid, when I was young, when I was younger. Now there could be any number of things that follow when I was, but our experience of the previous situation, of hearing this kind of thing in the past, tells us that it's most likely to be something connected to a kid. So when I was a kid, what comes next? Thanks, Ruby. There's still two more bits though. Yeah, so again, have a look in the chat and you'll notice that a lot of people have come up with similar ideas. And this is also important to show that our predictions aren't always 100% correct, but using predictions can help us. So here's the next part. What do you think the final part of my sentence is? Yes, Yulia, I like that. When I was a kid, I used to go out without a mask. Now, yeah, so a few people have got it right. They've said, I used to go swimming. And now this is something, again, what's our experience? That when you were a kid, you used to go swimming, but as an adult, maybe you don't have time. But there's lots of different possible solutions or possible endings to this. But this is something to show the learners that we do this all the time. You do it when you're listening, but you do it very, very quickly. If I pause in the middle of a sentence, you probably can guess what the next word will have been based on your previous knowledge, based on the context, based on what's going on. You can make a very educated guess. So this is something you can do with audio, either audio that the learners have never heard before, especially if they're higher levels, and get them to predict. You can maybe play a sentence and get them to predict what the next kind of paragraph will be, what kind of information will be there, what kind of language they might hear. Or you can get learners to do something similar to what I did. So you can pause in the middle of a sentence and get them to predict what the next few words might be. So this all trains their top-down kind of prediction skills. Yes, sorry, I lied. Not a couple of activities, just the one. Yeah, and that's from John Field. Okay, so other things you can do to help them. Oh no, that's a lie. To help them with top-down is you can bring in a range of voices to the classroom so that the learners aren't just listening to the same kind of accents all the time. Now, coursebooks have improved a lot over the last few years, and there are a much wider range of accents, but it's still very age limited, and there's still a preponderance of native speaker accents, even though more non-native speakers or more people with different language backgrounds are used in the audios. So something that you can do, especially in the age of Zoom, is get more guests into your classroom. So these could be real life people coming into the classroom, or they could be, I've put Skype here, but Zoom now. So for example, when I was volunteering at the Olympics, I Skyped into a classroom in Argentina. Or when my cousin came to visit me in Newcastle, the students came up with questions and he visited the classroom that they could quiz him and hear how he actually used the grammar that we'd been studying. That was their challenge, to write questions that would get him to produce the grammar naturally. Another way of getting a range of voices into your classroom is by leaving the classroom. So it doesn't matter about accents, as long as they're not the same people that they hear speak English every lesson. So you have your kind of 10 people in your classroom that you're used to listening to. They can go and speak to the receptionist in English, who they're not used to hearing in English, or they can do a survey outside the classroom. I know that's harder for some people to do, but it's a possibility. Other sources you can use is something like the English Language Listening Library. This has accents from all over the world. Or you could use TubeQuizlet, which is a fantastic website. If you take nothing away from this presentation, go and look at TubeQuizlet. All these links are on my blog. Or there are also books like Collins English for Life, which use authentic English, that have a range of voices that your learners can use. Extended listening. So we talk about extended reading. In the age of Netflix, a lot of learners are already watching films and TV programs, and you'll have noticed that those learners are much more confident with listening. So encouraging students who don't do that to maybe start watching a series occasionally, or look at things on the BBC, for example, look at podcasts. Or, as somebody mentioned earlier on, TED Talks, which have the massive benefit that they normally have a transcript underneath them. So encouraging your learners to do this kind of extended listening can really help them. I've mentioned two names a few times. I've mentioned John Field and I've mentioned Richard Cauldwell. This syllabus for listening is fantastically useful for showing just the range of different problems that learners might have and suggesting ways that you can deal with them. And this whole presentation and my ideas from it came out of reading Listening in the Language Classroom as part of my Delta, which absolutely changed the way that I approach listening. So I would definitely recommend exploring those if you're interested in finding out more about listening. Richard Cauldwell's website, Speech in Action, also has a lot of useful resources. And you can see talks by John Field on YouTube as well. So definitely worth exploring. I think we've come to the end of the presentation. I'm not sure there's any time for questions, but you're very welcome to go to the link that's here and post comments or questions in there, or to contact me on Twitter or by email. And hopefully you've all found that useful, and there are some interesting things that you've not thought about before. Thank you very much for coming this morning.
Thank you very much, Sandy. And thank you everyone for being here. I think that concludes our last session of the season, as I was saying, of Coffee at IH. It's been a great one, and as I was saying in the beginning, you can expect your certificates of attendance within 2 weeks, and we're looking forward to having you here again starting in October. Great. Thank you. Have a lovely day. Bye.
Alex, we'll get to the meeting quick.
Hi, Alex.
See you.
See ya.